All right, today we're tackling a huge question, one that gets to the very heart of how businesses are run. When the big decisions get made, who gets a say? We're going to dive deep into this idea of workers' participation in management and really figure out who's calling the shots.
So let's just start with that, right? Who should be in the driver's seat? Is it just the job of the executives in the C-suite to steer the ship? Or do the people on the front lines, the ones doing the actual work day in and day out, deserve a real voice at the table? That's the fundamental tension we're going to unpack.
So, before we get too deep, we've got to be on the same page. When we talk about giving a worker a seat at the table, what does that actually look like? What are we really talking about?
Okay, so at its core, workers' participation in management, let's just call it WPM, is pretty much what it sounds like. It's a formal process, a system, that's set up to give employees a real, actual share in the decision-making power of the company they work for. It's all about moving away from a strictly top-down approach to something way more collaborative. But here's the thing you've got to understand. Participation isn't just a simple yes or no, an on or off switch. Not at all. It's really a spectrum, a whole range of different levels of involvement. Think of it like a ladder. So this ladder really helps visualize the different rungs of power. Way down at the bottom, you have the informative level. This is basically where workers are just told what's happening after the decision has already been made. Take a step up, and you're at consultative. Management asks for your opinion, but they don't have to listen. Then things get more serious with associative, where there's a real moral pressure on management to actually use the workers' advice. Nearing the top, you get to administrative, where management and workers are side by side making joint decisions on some things. And then right at the very top of the ladder is decisive. This is the ultimate goal for proponents, where workers are equal partners in making all the big decisions. Okay, so that's the theory, right? The ladder of what could be. But how does this stuff actually play out in the real world? How do you put these ideas into practice in a real company?
Well, you see, this isn't usually some informal, let's just chat kind of thing. To make it work, participation is often formalized through official groups, specifically things like works committees and joint management councils. These are the engines that are supposed to make it all happen.
Now, let's break down the difference between these two because this is where the rubber really meets the road in terms of an employee's actual influence. On one hand, you have a works committee. Think of this as being focused on the immediate, day-to-day stuff. Working conditions, safety, amenities. Its power is mostly advisory. But then you have the Joint Management Council, and that's a whole different level. It deals with much bigger, broader issues like worker welfare, new training programs, and even company efficiency. So, while a works committee might fight for a new coffee machine in the break room, a Joint Management Council could be involved in creating a whole new career development program. It's a pretty significant jump in scope and power.
All right, so we've got these different models for participation, but do you see them everywhere? Not really. It turns out there's been a pretty big split between how public companies and private companies have tackled this.
Yeah, if you look back at the history here, the pattern is crystal clear. For decades, the real push for these kinds of participation programs has come from the public sector, companies that are owned or run by the government. They've kind of been the main laboratory for these ideas for a long, long time.
And wow, when you see it visually, the difference is huge. Government-run organizations have just been far, far more likely to set up these formal worker participation systems. Meanwhile, in the private sector, it's been a lot less common, and when it does happen, it's often completely voluntary. So you can see the problem, right? With this big gap between the two sectors, a lot of people started thinking, hey, just hoping companies do this isn't really cutting it. If this idea was truly important, maybe it needed more than just encouragement. Maybe it needed the force of law. And this quote really sums up the whole mindset. For the people who truly believed in this, they realized that to make WPM a widespread, meaningful part of how we work, it couldn't just be a suggestion. It had to be the law. And this whole movement, this entire push to make it a legal requirement, well, it all came to a head in one very specific year, 1990. This was the moment everything changed, with a huge, game-changing bill being introduced. So what did this 1990 bill try to do? Well, it was incredibly ambitious. First off, it aimed to make worker participation mandatory for companies, no more choosing. And it wasn't just for small things. It was meant to apply to every level of a company, from the factory floor all the way up to the board of directors. The goal was to create one single standardized system for the whole country. This wasn't some minor tweak, it was a total overhaul. So where does that leave us? That bill from 1990, it never actually became law. But the ideas behind it, about giving employees a real voice, about sharing power, about workplace democracy, man, those ideas are more relevant today than ever before. Which leads to a pretty fascinating final thought. In our current conversations about what the future of work should look like, could the key actually be hidden in this ambitious 30-year-old proposal? It's definitely something to think about.